Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Michael Murphy. I'm the president of the European University Association, and it's a pleasure on behalf of the board, the council, and the secretariat of EUA to welcome everyone warmly to the 2021 annual conference. It's our first online annual conference. The pandemic hit last year just before the scheduled Gdansk event, and we didn't have the time to reorganize. And I guess you were all too busy anyway, managing the crisis in your own universities. So this year, the title of the conference is Universities 2030, From Vision to Reality. And there have been a few drivers for this topic. The first is that you will have seen in the lobby that this is the 20th anniversary of the formation of EUA, a marriage between the Association of European Rectors and the Confederation of European Union Rectors Conferences in Salamanca back in 2001. So it's a birthday with a zero. And then secondly, the past year has seen the dawn of a new decade, another zero, a traditional inflection point where we tend to reflect, survey the past, and do some horizon scanning. And then, of course, the pandemic. It reminded us that the world always holds big surprises for all of us, but it also, of course, revealed the capacities of universities to change, to transform ourselves. And the pandemic provided a showcase for the importance of universities in society, addressing challenges through research, education, innovation, and civic engagement. So in 2020, we undertook a review. We consulted over 100 experts within the university sector and many from outside on what the future holds and how we as universities have to adjust in the coming years to meet the needs of society. The title, Universities Without Walls, sets out the challenges, the important challenges facing us, and it also provides guidelines to universities on planning for change. It's a vision statement, and of course, visions are pointless unless accompanied by steps for implementation. And that's where the conference comes in. We're here to discuss the various steps that we have to take in order to reach our goal, reach our vision in the coming years. Hybrid campus, how do we implement that? How do we promote interdisciplinarity while sustaining the core strengths of disciplines? If we're going to encourage parity of esteem between the different elements of university missions, how do we reform our incentives, our reward systems, so that staff actually work towards the vision and students learn differently? How do universities play a part in the future in sustaining European culture and values? And of course, we realize that partnerships across society will be vital in helping us to meet our goals. So questions such as, what are the ingredients for successful partnerships? And finally, international collaboration is critical at a time when the challenges are largely global and the solutions have to be attained through global cooperation, though that's growing in complexity. So there's plenty of food for thought in the 7 sessions over the next 2 days. I hope that you will be able to join us in each of them and that you will get some answers, some guidance as you plan change in your own institutions. Because we have a responsibility to make sure that our universities are fit for purpose in the coming years. The resilience of society will depend upon us. So, a big virtual welcome to all of you, big topics ahead. And I will hand over at this point to my colleague, Amanda Crowfoot, who is the Secretary General of the Association, who will moderate for the next 50 minutes or so. So, Amanda, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'd like to very much add my welcome to you all, in addition to what Michael has already said, both to this conference and also to this opening session. This session is really intended to set the scene for the rest of the conference. So what we want to look at for the next 50 minutes or so is really what is the path ahead for Europe's universities in the context both of the European Union's ambitions for higher education and research and innovation, but also in the context of the EUA vision for 2030, the Universities Without Walls, which Michael has already mentioned. So we're going to be talking about the overall landscape for universities, the challenges and the opportunities, before we then drill down into the specifics in the later sessions of the conference. So I'm really pleased today that we'll have two panelists grappling with these interesting and tricky topics. I'd first like to welcome Pam Fredman. Pam is president of the International Association of Universities, IAU, which is a global network of higher education institutions. And she's also the former rector of the University of Gothenburg in Sweden, amongst many other roles, which you can see in the detailed biographies in the conference booklet. Our second panelist is Michael Murphy, president of EUA, who you've already just met this afternoon. Michael's also was previously rector of University College Cork in Ireland, also amongst many other roles. So I think both Pam and Michael have really extensive experience of the sector that we can tap into in our discussion today. Before we kick off with the discussion, though, I'm delighted to announce that we have a video message from Charles Michel, President of the European Council. As many of you will know, Charles Michel has been president since 2009, and he's also a former Prime Minister of Belgium. And as president of the body that defines the overall political direction and priorities of the EU, we're really interested to hear his reflections on the universities of Europe and our conference theme. So having said that, could we have the video, please, Aurélie?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your invitation. Universities are vibrant institutions alive with ideas, debate, research and growth. You play a vital role in the lives of people and societies. And during the global pandemic, you are of course all these things, but you are also much more. You strengthen the fabric of our societies through education and continued engagement with our communities. COVID-19 has upended our societies, but it has also upended higher education in Europe and across the world. As we envisage a world after the pandemic, we may be asking a number of questions about the future of our universities. What should our universities look like after COVID? How should they function? And perhaps most importantly, how can universities shape our post-pandemic world? Today we face countless challenges, defeating the virus and rebooting our economies, among many others. We are at a pivotal moment in our history. This is also true for you, our great European universities. You are at a turning point, facing challenges that we could not have imagined just 1 year ago. And it's why, like every sector of our societies, from politics to business to education, you will have to adapt, be flexible, and capitalize on the opportunities of this tumultuous time. And the two great opportunities of our time are the green and digital transitions. I believe our universities can and must play a vigorous role in shaping this common future. These twin transformations will define the coming century, and you, our universities, must be a powerful engine in driving forward our efforts. Ladies and gentlemen, you educate the experts of tomorrow in state-of-the-art technologies, innovation, and many other critical fields. Political leaders, business leaders, and you in higher education, we must work together to boost the virtuous link between education and skills, research and innovation, and jobs, business, economic growth. This holistic approach will not only power our climate and digital ambitions, it will generate economic prosperity and shore up our resilience. Universities are right at the center of the so-called knowledge square between education, research, innovation, and inspiration for our societies. Ladies and gentlemen, it's interesting and even exciting to imagine our universities of the future in 10 years, in 50 years. What will they look like? How will they shape our societies? And I like the description in your publication, Universities Without Walls. This implies adaptability and openness. Openness to embracing the new digital campus. Openness to being a catalyst for innovation. Openness to joining forces with other sectors of society. And openness to greater flexibility and cooperation among universities across Europe. Our European universities are striving to come out of this period stronger, revitalized and prepared for the coming decades. This means developing pan-European talent pools in science technologies such as artificial intelligence, cybersecurity and high-performance computing to achieve our green and digital goals. European and international cooperation between universities and multidisciplinary teams will also foster the sharing of knowledge and talents. Ladies and gentlemen, our democracies are coming under increased pressure. And our universities must therefore continue to be home to academic freedom and democratic values, free speech, gender equality, fundamental rights. These principles must be cherished and nurtured, today more than ever, as they are threatened across the globe. Our universities must remain temples of knowledge, talent, and evidence-based information. As foreign interference and disinformation seek to infiltrate our societies, intellectual rigor will only grow in importance. Ladies and gentlemen, last year, European leaders agreed a historic 1.8 trillion euro recovery package. And as part of this, Horizon Europe will receive almost 100 billion euro, a 30% increase in comparison with the current research and innovation program. This makes it the most ambitious research and innovation program in the Union's history. And every euro of Union funds dedicated to partnerships will be matched with at least one additional euro from private or public partners. It will mobilize resources at all levels to tackle urgent global challenges like fighting cancer, greening our cities, transforming our mobility, and digitizing our societies. Europe has always been good in making world-class science with money. But now, it's time to create more added value from this world-class science, and this means translating research into market opportunities and strengthening entrepreneurship. Ladies and gentlemen, one last topic close to my heart, Erasmus+. As a university student, I participated in the Erasmus program, and I never forgot this great experience. With a budget of over 26 billion euro, 12 billion more than the previous budget, the new program will be stronger, greener, more digital, and more inclusive. It will also support new flagship initiatives, such as European universities. Ladies and gentlemen, you have stepped up to the challenge during the pandemic, from developing vaccines to engaging with our communities. I am confident that our European universities of tomorrow will continue to prosper and add value to the lives of our citizens and to our societies. Let's all work together to build greener, more digital, more democratic, and more equitable societies. I wish you a fruitful conference. Thank you.
I do apologise for the slight echo at the beginning of the recording. I hope that didn't detract too much from what you were hearing. And I'd really like to thank Charles Michel very much on behalf of all of EUA for contributing that message to our conference and giving us plenty of food for thought and food for discussion. Now I'd like to come to our panelists for some initial reaction to the message that we've just heard from Mr. Michel. So I'd like to start with you, Michael, and ask you if you could please share your first reflections on what you've just heard, and particularly whether or not there's anything else that you felt was missing from the message that you would have hoped or expected to see included in a message from the President of the European Council. Either Michael? I come to Pam instead, if you can hear me, Pam.
Yes.
I'll start with you then. I think maybe Michael may be not hearing me for the moment, so I'll start with you for your initial reactions.
Yeah, it was very nice to listen to him, but I do have some concerns also. He raises the very important issues of academic freedom, freedom of speech, and the fundamental values of the higher education institutions. But with all the programs and all the efforts being in partnership and so on, how much of possibilities do the higher education institutions really have to be unique, to see to the academic freedom, and be a partner with the trust and the unique role it has? I missed that. I also missed, to some extent, the COVID has really shown that the challenges we have, they are global, and all the sustainable development goals are interconnected, so we cannot separate. And I would strengthen what he said. We need much more of multidisciplinary approaches for the future, and that is a challenge, and that is something that we have to take care of within the universities. But otherwise, I think that he pinpointed important things, and I guess you are going back to the academic freedom and how, with the finance and the funding systems we do have in most nations, how could we be strong partners in research programs?
Thank you very much indeed, Pam. Michael, I think we have you back with us again. So if I could throw the same question to you, please, your initial reactions on what we heard from Mr. Michel, and if there's anything else you would have hoped or expected to see included there.
Ooh, as my blood pressure is now falling again.
And mine.
Yeah, my first reaction is that actually it was good he joined us asynchronously, as we now say in online learning. We were worried last year because in the State of the Union address by the President of the Commission, research and education were hardly mentioned, and little recognition of the role of universities in addressing both the pandemic and the future. So it's good that we had participation. It also reminds us that in trying to advance the cause of universities, we do need to engage more with the member states so that heads of government coming to Brussels to make decisions have positions that we have already influenced through our national rectors and universities. But on the content of the speech, I guess I picked the end of Pam's talk. He picked up on most of the key points, but I would like to have seen him address some of the things that member states can do, that the European Council itself can do in terms of enabling universities to be successful. The regulatory frameworks, the investments in direct funding and infrastructure and staff upskilling and so on. That's a space we've got to go back to the Council on, but a good start.
Thanks very much indeed, and I'm sure we will come back to some of those points later in the session that you've both raised. I'd like to please just encourage the audience to, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please do put them in the Q&A function, and we'll get to as many of those as we can slightly later in the session. What I'd like to do now, though, having had those first reactions to the video, is maybe turn to EUA's vision for Universities 2030, Universities Without Walls. As we've said, that's one of the main drivers for this conference and this discussion today. And Michael, you touched on it in your introduction a little bit, but I wonder if you could say a few words more about what really was the driver behind EUA producing this vision now? So why was now the right time for us to do this? And what particular challenges do you think were the ones most important to address?
Well, I suppose I said at the outset that we had calendar reasons to do it. But of course, that's not that they weren't the drivers. The reality is that we recognize that the world is changing very rapidly. Change is accelerating. Some of the challenges facing us are quite menacing. And of course, others have the potential to drive beneficial change. But we can't ignore the fact that environmental sustainability and climate change, at the same addressing those while maintaining a healthy economy and civic well-being. And as President Michel pointed out, digitalization, artificial intelligence, the impact of those on the workplace and the skills that new graduates need to have leaving universities. Demographic shifts, whether it be declining birth rates or migration, societal polarization, partly driven by misinformation through new media, but certainly destabilizing democracies. And more widely, the geopolitical realignments that are taking place that impact on universities' capacity to engage in global collaboration. These are really important challenges, and we have to make sure that what we are doing and how we do what we are doing will be fit for purpose in the coming decade. And our change is going to have to match the pace of change out in society. They're the main drivers for reflection.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Pam, do you recognise those same challenges, or would you have any other additional challenges to kind of put on the table? You're muted, Pam.
I think what Michael is bringing forward is what we are seeing, and we are sitting in a lot of international conferences, and we see the same challenges and this also the same opportunities. I would say that there is an opportunity. The pandemic has shown that there is an increasing interest from societies and from politicians for the universities, and we should take that open window and take that opportunity. Another thing which I would like to bring to the table, and I'm not sure you mentioned that, Michael, and that is it's our responsibility for equality and ethical perspectives for the societies. And the situation we are having right now with less funding and the crisis will show even more is how do we meet the need of access to higher education, access to knowledge development all around the world. It is a challenge, and I see that we need to work together. We have to cooperate to fulfill that role.
Thank you. So, I mean, I think you both set out a very good sort of case for what the challenges are and what the kind of current landscape is. So having said that, Michael, I wonder, particularly for the benefit of those who may not be familiar yet with the Universities Without Walls vision, if you could maybe say a few things, just to point out some of the key principles of the vision, and also maybe say something about how radical you actually think our vision is at this point in time.
Well, I guess the key word is open. We use the title Without Walls, so no more ivory towers. Blended campuses are here to stay. Traditional combined with online. Institutions that are really embedded in our regions and as well as globally, and collaborating with all elements in society, not only business and industry, which President Michel highlighted, but also with civil society. And that means, of course, students actually learning in those spaces. I think there would be a lot more experiential learning in both workplaces and in cultural spaces, because that's going to be essential if we're going to robot-proof our graduates in the workforce into the future. Well, we see staff moving too through the walls. A lot more staff going out back into business and going into civic society to reskill, make sure that everything is up to date, and people from experts from outside coming into the universities. So a lot of regional engagement and regional innovation, but at the same, oh yes, and networked. I mean, networked across Europe. The European research area, European education area, they're only going to happen as universities play their part in connecting all parts in Europe. Pam mentioned diversity, absolutely important. And at the end of the day, we have to say it, the overarching goal is enabling society to reach the UN Sustainable Development Goals. That captures the holistic function of universities into the future. I'm glad the President did mention our values, because we're not going to be successful unless we sustain our autonomy and while we're accountable, and that we have our core academic values, academic freedom, while at the same time responsive to society. Much more engagement by the outside world in governance of universities. I think that will be really important. And then open to change in learning. Lifelong learning demands more flexibilities, micro-credentials, the whole concept of learning being refocused on it being a co-learning experience. We're not teaching anymore. We're creating knowledge with our young people. And the final element of openness that's important is that our research is openly published, openly accessible, that the data are. And that's very, very important if we are to restore trust in research, in science, and in expertise. So in every aspect of what we do, the term has to be open.
Thanks, Michael. So Pam, I mean, building on this, the vision that Michael's just outlined, this is obviously something that was developed in Europe. It was developed by European universities for European universities, and you represent an organisation that's global in outlook. So I wondered, how much does the vision resonate with you, and how much do you think this applies to universities beyond the European area?
I would say that the vision is not very different. And I think that we have the same vision all around the world, more or less. But the possibilities to live up to this vision is very, very diverse around the world. Just taking the digitalization, which we see, and we have learned now during the COVID pandemic situation that can use it. But we have to remember that not everyone is there. It's not something that everyone can take part of. We also have to think about people who are enabled to use this type of system. And so it's not just that it's the more poor countries or rich countries, it's also within countries there is an inequality when it comes to this. So the most diverse thing or inequality purpose is funding systems. And with the vision we have, and the visions all universities have, it's very, very difficult for those countries where you have mainly private universities, and which doesn't take the same concern always about the whole perspectives of universities. We also have very, very low funding from the governments. And how should university get the respect, get the recognition they should have as independent and academic freedom perspectives when there is no funding from the government? They will be more and more dependent on other actors. They might have good intentions, it's not what I'm saying, but their own possibilities to be strategic and to take the responsibility as higher education institution is very bad in some part of the world.
Thanks, Pam. I mean, yes, please,
Amanda,
Michael.
Was this radical? And of course, the answer to that is not really for most, because most universities are on the path, and many are well on the path.
Yeah.
And it will be exceptional that institutions in Europe will find this to be radical.
Thanks. Pam, you brought us on very nicely to the kind of sort of transitioning from what is the vision to the whole notion of what we need to kind of enable and support universities going forward by kind of mentioning the funding issue, which is clearly a big issue, is investment in research and higher education. Michael, I wonder if you yourself have any comment on that, about the funding challenges for universities, and maybe how universities can actually evolve and innovate if they do have financial constraints.
Direct public investment in universities in Europe varies a lot across Europe. We just published the latest findings of the EUA funding observatory last week, and one can see enormous disparities. Some recovered very well from the financial crisis. Some didn't even realize there was a financial crisis in a few countries. And then some have not recovered at all yet. And some are further challenged by the fact that student numbers are increasing and, again, challenging the system. So, but the reality is that without investment, Europe nor universities will be successful. Now, the second thing I would say is that where governments are unable or unwilling to fund sufficiently, I do think they need to give freedom to universities to be more innovative in actually raising their own funding from private sources. Although universities must do that adhering to principles of inclusivity and solidarity. It can't be a matter of the rich doing best and ignoring others. But there has to be autonomy organizationally for universities to do this. The state and the EU need to invest beyond universities in the infrastructure, digital infrastructure, green transport, upskilling of university staff as much as any others in society. That will be important. So with freedom, I think we can do a lot ourselves to compensate for the reductions in direct funding that will probably follow the pandemic.
Great, thanks, Michael. So we have, thinking about the sort of the enablers of the development of universities in the sector. So we've got funding, we've talked about autonomy. Do either of you have any other kind of enabling or supporting factors that you wanted to kind of put on the table in terms of what's required for governments to provide or the EU to provide to support universities? Michael, you're nodding, so I'll come to you first.
I was going to say ladies first. The regulatory framework. We've known for the last 50 years as Europe's universities have networked themselves through research and through joint degrees and so on, that there are lots of bureaucratic barriers to cooperation across borders. And it really is important that the EU takes the lead in challenging those states that are most restrictive and drive the agenda for a level playing field across Europe. I think that will be critical for the ERA, for the EEA, and for the Universities Initiative currently sponsored by the Commission. As much as funding, bureaucratic barriers.
Pam, if I can come to you with the same question.
I think that what I always think about is that if we doesn't have governments and policymakers and also society which recognize the universities for what they are in the society, their unique role. If governments support, I mean, even without money, that's a very, very important step, that they recognize the universities and the academic freedom. And I would hope that we will see that more, because it's a challenge everywhere around the world right now. The other thing is this, that cooperation and collaboration is also valued, and that includes cooperation and collaboration at the local level, because that if we should have the social impact, we have to also have programs which are local but with global perspectives. But we also need to have cooperation between countries in the different parts of the world, because if we do not see that we will have capacity building and we also learn from other countries, we will not reach the goals. We cannot do that in separate areas of the world. We have to cooperate. And we are more fortunate in some parts of the world for funding and for doing this than in others. And from governments, I think that just recognizing and supporting these initiatives to collaborate and cooperate, I think would be very, very helpful.
Michael, did you want to come back on that?
There were two further thoughts that came across my mind as Pam was speaking on a moment. The national accountability frameworks that are being put in place, performance contracts and compacts, now quite common across Europe. We've got to be very careful to ensure that they are fit for purpose and not too restrictive. I'm aware of one country where there are over 200 performance indicators that have to be measured every year. That stifles creativity. And so I would say frameworks that maximize institutional freedom, but sufficient to assure the population that their taxes are being well spent. And the second one that I'm concerned about is that in the research policy framework that across Europe, we've got to take a good look at whether the balance is right between mission-driven research and investigator or academic initiated blue skies thinking. That balance may be going out of kilter, and in a way it's a breach of academic freedom. The block grant system, the block grant systems in many countries are shrinking, and that has always been the source of funding for initiated or investigator initiated research. So careful in ensuring accountability that we're not stifling creativity. Thank
you, Michael. I'd like to turn now to a slightly different topic before I open it to some questions from the Q&A, which we're getting quite a few questions in, which is good. But I wanted to briefly return to something that President Michel said in his talk, where he really underlined that the absolute flagships of EU policy are the green and digital transitions. And I wondered if either of you had any thoughts on what you think the role of the universities could or should be in delivering the green and digital transitions. Pam, that comes to you first.
He was speaking about green and digital. I mean, that's part of the change we will see in society, and we all know that this is needed, but it's part of all the sustainable development goals. And universities' role is actually to see that we provide competence and new knowledge within all the disciplines we have, because we will see social problems, we will see human perspectives within the developing in technology we are going to see. So universities cannot just focus on one thing which is on the agenda right now. We are going to see to that we have people skilled for taking care of the societies. And I think that what happened now with the pandemic, if university would not have provided with good competence, with good knowledge, with new knowledge, how could we have handled the pandemic? I mean, vaccines would not have been on the table so quickly unless we had curiosity research for many, many years, and we had a competence available. We have leaders who has the capacity to also help to meet all the challenges and take care of the situation we have.
Thanks, Pam. Michael?
Yes, Pam has mentioned the major issues. We train the professionals, educate those who will be implementing this agenda in society. We create the knowledge through research. We also lead by example. The movement for green campuses, for example, across Europe has been quite remarkable. And if one now looks at the performance of our institutions in meeting the SDGs on campus, we are certainly well ahead of governments generally in both their policies and in their measures and their metrics. We can do more, I think, to grow the culture of the SDGs, green and of course digital economy, by engaging better, I think, in public discourse. We need to be more active out in our regional societies, in the media, writing the op-ed pieces. In fact, I think one thing we do need to think about is whether the think tanks on which governments rely have stolen our clothes. Because over the years, they have grown up using information that is generated largely in the university sector, but not exclusively. And they have conveyed that information in simpler language, understood better by politicians, understood better by media. And I think we've got to go back and ask ourselves, can we restore that role, that influence in social discourse in order to drive the culture of change and adherence to the sustainability goals? It's a challenge for us.
Thank you both. Sticking with this topic of SDGs and also the whole notion of impact and openness, we have a question from the audience, which is about how we reconcile university behaviour being driven by rankings and other such measurements against actually the goals of public service and SDGs and openness. So how do you think there is an issue there, and how can we kind of change the balance so that, you know, success is seen in a kind of in a wider dimension than maybe at present? Michael?
I missed your opening two sentences.
It was about the tension between rankings and kind of university behaviour and success being driven by rankings and the like, and actually being driven by impact and SDGs and openness and the factors we've talked about today.
In my first 3 years as university president, I lost sleep over rankings. In my last 7, I didn't. Because I realized that they measure what's measurable. They measure some things that are important, but many things that are not important, and they don't measure many important things that they should. And furthermore, I have to say, and I have a conflict of interest here, because I chair the advisory board of U Multi-Rank, not a great name, but I'm a believer in measuring performance of universities, but not in ranking them. That's a personal bias. We should be subject to measurement because it drives performance and it drives the peer pressures on which academics and students thrive. But the days that rankings should drive the strategy of university, in my view, are long gone. And the new paradigm, measure, but not rank.
I agree. I'm not a funder of rankings at all. And I would add to what you said, Mike, and that is, we have also something to do with in the higher education area, and that is our merit system. We don't help to see and recognize merits from social impact, from other activities. And as you say, why do we have think tanks taking over what we should do? Because you should publish more papers and you should publish them in a certain. We own that question within the universities if we did. But then also the rankings, we have to go, I agree, because someone wants to see what have you done with the money, and in particular for tax money. So, but I would like to see more of qualitative investigations of what have been done instead of measurements, because that is driving in the direction of what we can measure.
And the system must recognize diversity.
Yep.
Different universities have different primary missions. Some are highly research intensive. Others are regional institutions who educate the local workforce and drive the local economy. Different universities have different functions, and these one-size-fit-all ranking systems are absurd.
Great, thank you both. Another question we have from our audience is that in the introductory speech, obviously it was focused on the crucial role of universities, but we all recognise that universities can't need in many different areas to actually work with other stakeholders, including industry, in order to kind of achieve their goals. So how can these kind of partnerships be further promoted, do you think? Research partnerships, but also building strategic partnerships with all of the kind of appropriate bodies that universities need. Michael?
Bring them onto campus and go spend time with them. Now, there has been a tradition in recent years of having advisors to schools and colleges within universities, predominantly from industry. In fact, in many institutions, almost exclusively from business. And it has been a cursory relationship. We do need to have practitioners across all spaces and sectors in society deeply with us, both in governance, which I mentioned earlier, but also in course design. And we also will need them more and more on campus, and we need to be with them, because as students will require more experiential learning, if we are to robot-proof humans, then the workplaces have to be prepared to be places of learning. I always cite medicine as the classic example. For 150 years, the model has existed, but you have to have, you design the space, and you also have to ensure that those who are supervising students in those experiences are competent, and also competent in setting learning goals and in assessing. So it has to be a really deep relationship with across society if we're to have the partnerships that we both need.
Yeah, I think that the partnership is important, and that could be done in a very good way. There is a risk that the partners have too much of influence. I mean, it's good to have a dialogue on the educational programs and what is needed. I'm not sure that the business sector knows what they need for the future all the time, but the dialogue is very, very important. But coming back to them again, we need to have universities which has the strength to be a partner, because if there's too much of dependence on those we are inviting, how could university leadership or universities take the role they should? It's not a good dialogue. So I believe in partnerships, and I've been around with that, and I would like to extend what you're saying. We know from medical education and so on, we have had this people going back and forward, and people working as practitioners, and they are involved in the education. That system could be developed in all areas.
Yeah, absolutely.
Expensive. Resource intensive.
And you've both talked a lot, and President Michel talked a lot about universities in terms of society. And I wondered, what you thought of the current relationship between universities and kind of wider society at the moment, and if you think there are changes that need to be made there. Pam, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I think that it's so different, it's so diverse, and I would say for the last 5 years at least, I have seen so many examples on how universities around the world works with society. And that really brings the interest, the recognition, and the trust between society, and that all the sectors and universities. So I think it's very good. And in Sweden, we have had a lot of cooperation and work with the societies for a long time. But we need to extend that, I think, even more. But then again, do we recognize staff or faculties who does this type of work in their merit system? Unless we don't do that, they will continue to do their research, and I understand that, and less taking time to be involved in the society. But if we would have long-term trust from politicians, from governments, we need the support from the society, because they will give the signals to the politicians, and the politicians there to fund and stand behind the higher education.
you've used the word dialogue a lot, Pam, and you're absolutely right. One thing I would say is perhaps that we need to engage in a bit more respectful dialogue. We have tended to talk at people, and it's been bi-directional. I think we need to have a better understanding of what the drivers are on each side, what the pressures are, what the limitations on action are. I think we might also, it is very important that we have all of these parts of society as partners with us, championing our cause for investment, talking to government to attract resources to us. I think we need to be more modest at times. We have our fallibilities and our vulnerabilities. We certainly have to work on our ethics and integrity. Research integrity at the moment is an important subject. And we need to communicate, as I said earlier, with simpler language. But they all have to understand that we have a certain view that the first job is not the sole reason for an education in university, that it's a process to support people through life, through all domains of human interest. But dialogue, reshape somewhat, I think would be my comment.
Thank you. I want to come to one last quick question before we go to a short poll that we have for our audience. We've mentioned academic freedom and institutional autonomy as framework, as important framework conditions. And there's a question from our audience about how EUA and IAU at the moment act to actually support and reinforce academic freedom. So I wonder if I could just ask both of you for just a few words on what's actually happening now in this space in terms of your organizations. So Pam.
The academic freedom is the topic everywhere, and there is a crucial thing, that is when we mention academic freedom, the definition, the interpretation of that is quite different. So we have to be aware of that when we talk about that in at least internationally. So it is, but there is a strong working groups on this, because we have institutions now really in danger without any academic freedom at all. And for the European thing, I would say that the document from the is it called the Rome document from the member last year with the ministers, I think that they really highlighted again now the academic freedom. And I think that is important, not just for Europe, it's important for the rest of the world that Europe takes a strong decision on this issue.
Michael?
Well, fundamental. Our autonomy scorecard is a source document that is widely used across Europe as an ongoing measure of change in academic freedom, because there is change occurring at all times, and we have to be wary at all times to protect the freedoms that we have. Particularly, as I mentioned earlier, the risk of covert restriction on the traditional role of universities and academics through the accountability frameworks that can be too prescriptive. And as I said earlier, the research funding policies that are covertly diminish freedom. We also, of course, at EUA, we engage directly with governments and universities in countries right across Europe where we see poor behavior. And we recently participated in the reshaping of the Magna Carta, and we were a founder member of the Magna Carta Observatory, which is a really important tool to monitor and also challenge academic freedom difficulties across the world. So it's something that's on our agenda every day.
Perfect, thank you both. So as I just mentioned, we're coming towards the end of the session, and we'd actually like to take the opportunity to do a quick poll to our audience with us today. We've heard in the space of the last hour thoughts and reflections on a huge range of different topics, and we'd quite like to get a sense of which of the topics that we've been speaking about, or some of the topics we've been speaking about, you think would be most useful and most relevant for further exploration. So for example, at EUA future events or our future conferences, or where you, in whatever your role is within the sector, would find it most helpful to actually have kind of further engagement. So if we can have the poll up, please, and I'll give you a few minutes to answer this. Basically, we'd like to know which 3 of the following topics you actually are most interested in or would find most useful and relevant. So you have innovation in education and research, inclusivity and flexibility towards learners, multidisciplinary approaches, democratic values, academic freedom, strengthening entrepreneurship thinking, graduate employability, academic and non-academic cooperation, strengthening a European identity among staff and students, and environmental sustainability. We also have an other option if you think there's something really pressing missing and you want to tell us in the chat what that might be. So I'll give you a moment or two to make your choices. We know it's very difficult, and actually that all of them are important. It's just really we'd like to get a sense of what you feel your main priorities would be. And in a moment, I'll ask our panelists to reflect a little bit on what's coming up. So we have our poll has now disappeared. I think if I recall correctly from what I saw there, certainly the top point, innovation, was something that was getting an awful lot of votes. Environmental sustainability is something that was getting an awful lot of votes. Academic freedom. And then we have other things that have come up in the chat from the other suggestions. We have open science, global approach, internationalization. So, Michael, Pam, I wonder if you have any kind of quick thoughts on those.
Did you say that universities are diverse and views are diverse?
Absolutely. I think we could see from that everything was actually everything was coming up as important to some degree. We'll obviously post the results in the chat so that you have them. Was there anything just from what you did see with our polls there that surprised you, or anything that's come up? No, I have the results here in the chat, so I can see that now. Except no, I can't quite see the numbers correctly. So anyway, anything that surprised you that you did see?
No, something that was little reassuring. Environmental sustainability, clearly, that we pick that up everywhere. What has been very interesting for EUA in the past year, we've had 2 consultation processes, one on a strategic plan for the organization about 18 months ago, and then the review for the vision document. Time and again, we have been told that the learning agenda, teaching and learning, are matters that we need to address more. We were surprised that, in fact, something like twice as many contributors identified innovation in learning and teaching as being a priority compared with research innovation. And that's the message we're taking on board. We have our annual Teaching and Learning Forum. We have thematic peer groups. And I have to say to members who are watching, if you're not engaged with these processes, then you're not listening to what Europe is telling us. And so I'm not surprised. This has been coming through over the last year or so, reaffirmed here.
I didn't see the list which was on the top, but I think innovation in research and
Yes,
and
it was, yes.
Depending on what that means, but anyhow, I would like to add for the innovation. I'm surprised because innovation has become a word we are using everywhere. But more than 50%, maybe up to 70% of innovation in society takes place in business sector and in public sector, where the university is providing knowledge to be developed there, and also competent students who can take care of this wherever they go. So I would like to send that message to, as it is on the top. I think it was one of the top.
It was, yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much. We're just coming to the end of our time, unfortunately. I wonder if either of you have any last final comment you would like to make. Anything you really wanted to say this morning that I haven't yet given you a chance to. Michael?
Perhaps the summary statement following your poll would be academic freedom will be the main topic of discussion at next year's conference. And that probably summarizes the state of play in Europe.
And I would like to wish you a good conference. And I also hope that what's come up in the Europe situation now also becomes part of what's happening globally, because we are one system and we need to be cooperating and have solidarity all around the world. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Pam. Thank you both so much for your time, and I think you've set the scene brilliantly for the rest of the discussions that we have to come. Thank you all for participating from the audience and sending in your questions. I would like to just now invite you to come back outside into the virtual conference lobby, where our Masters of Ceremony will provide some further guidance to you on what's ahead for the rest of the conference. So in order to get back to the lobby, you need to click on the Leave button, which is in the top right-hand corner of the screen as at the moment. So I invite you all to leave and join my colleagues in the lobby. And thank you very much again for joining us this afternoon.